Greetings to everyone who decided to join this channel. I welcome you on my new podcast, Divine Destiny of Souls. Um, this podcast is my new endeavor where I'm going to be talking about my spiritual perceptions, the intuition, the spiritual design of our world, my communication with the higher beings, and the examples of my spiritual practice where I review the past lives of different people. And the basic idea behind this endeavor is to share the knowledge about the different archetypes or essences of souls and how we actually locked in some of our decisions because souls chose to experience certain destiny based on their essence. And this knowledge is heavily suppressed throughout the times for obvious reasons, but at the same time, for me, it is a real healing part of my practice, because when I share this knowledge with my clients, it usually empowers them because they can sort of reconcile with some elements of their stories based on their essence or destiny of their souls. And the idea behind it is to have this like a communication channel eventually where I would be answering questions and sharing the different stories that I gathered through my practice. But I was advised by my spiritual guides to start this podcast with telling my own story exactly as it happened. An idea behind it is that I'm going to be laying the groundwork or foundation for the future podcast, but basically like through telling my story, I would share my perceptions of the world, how I believe it's constructed, how I believe it works, and also through the examples of my journey and my communication, my connection with my soulmates from my soul family. I will also share different archetypes or essences of the souls, and which will sort of help to understand my spiritual perceptions. And then eventually it would be easier to sort of communicate with any one of you who would sort of be interested in exploring these topics and understanding them. And basically, my journey as of now, I'm on the path of spiritual awakening and learning shamanism, learning how to heal the souls. And by this time, I published one book, which basically tells the fictional account of my spiritual awakening in the form of a fairy tale. And then I was guided to write like a testament from my personal perspective, how this journey unfolded with some important elements. And as of now, when I finished this testament, I was advised by my guides to share the story in this form as well. And I strongly believe in this form. It's like it's an amazing thing what's happening in the world of podcasting and how people interact with each other in this way. Maybe eventually there would be a place to like have dialogues as well here, but one step at a time, basically. And I'm gonna be sharing my story exactly as it happened from the beginning, and I was advised to take it slow and to sort of tell as many details as possible about different elements of this journey, basically to connect and to share the deeper knowledge through these elements. And so I'm not sure how many episodes it would take to tell the entire story. I'm not going to rush it. And so as far as I understand, the words will come naturally, and the words will come exactly in the form that they needed to be spoken, and the elements of the story will be shared, the ones that need to be shared. So let's try and see where it leads. This journey leads. But I'm kind of like both excited and curious how it would actually be told. And then the beginning of the story, I guess should start by sharing that my sort of main main shamanic talent would be communication with the souls of the living and the dead. So I can do channeling of people who pass, but I can also sort of see the souls and communicate with the souls of the living, and this is the essence of my practice. So I don't really work with people as a clients physically. I work with their souls, and then they share the knowledge of what I gathered with them, and then we'll try to sort of decipher and kind of integrate that knowledge. And the idea behind the story is like this entire sort of first part of this podcast where I'm sharing my journey is a form of a confession. And then confession with the divinity, confession with the collective consciousness, meaning with you, whoever would be listening to this. It's also a confession to the Father Skies and to the Mother Nature. And it's kind of like a confession with myself as well. Because I'm trying to share the story in a different forms, because I strongly believe that it has a value beyond my personal journey. It has a value to others to sort of shape their perceptions and kind of empower them as well. And it's also a confession to my love to a sex worker. And we're going to be talking a lot about that as well in this program, about the sexual healing arts and how souls choose their paths, including being a shaman or being a sex worker. So the beginning of the story is, I have to start the story with the death of my father, which happened in October of 2005. And it's like evident for any person, the significance usually of that kind of like a trauma and the grief that is associated with that. Every one of us will eventually endure it in some form or the other. For some it will be less painful maybe, who had less connection with their parents. For some it would be more. And interestingly, in my story I never had like good relationship with my father when he was alive. For many different reasons, but mainly because of the place we were living. So I was born in Ukraine. My mother is from East Ukraine and my father from West Ukraine. And sort of, I would say that my family is this kind of like idea of like a Soborna Ukraine, which is basically the combination of these different elements. Like the western part of Ukraine mainly speaks Ukrainian. Eastern part of Ukraine mainly speaks Russian, so there's like a very interesting cultural inheritance, let's say it like that lives in me. And then but my parents actually met in the small town of Nizhnevartovsk, which is in the Russian Siberia. And the town was basically established like a couple of years before I was born. I was born in 1983, and the town was established for the purposes of extracting oil. They found this like oil reserve called Samatlor, Lake Samatlor, which basically one of the biggest Russian oil reserves. I'm not sure if it's the case right now, but that was the case back then. And so my mother's parents, they were architects, sort of working for the government in Kremenchuk in eastern Ukraine, and they were sort of summoned or like invited to build this new city for the new settlers. And so the first three like apartment buildings, 5-story buildings that were built in this town were built by them, and so the apartments, of course, were given to them, to the people who built them. And so my mother was there from like quite early age, from her teenage years, and then when she was like around in her early 20s, she met my father, and their love created me. And I was like, by now I know that it was important for my father and I to meet. We kind of like soulmates from past lives. We met in different other scenarios, and our souls are very connected, actually. And so by this time 2005, I was already studying in St. Petersburg, and I was just finished my bachelor's degree, and I decided to enroll in master's degree in film studies. So the exams happened like around the same time, like in October of 2005. So I received the call, and so by that time, again, my father's business was quite in ruins. I would say it like that. 90s were quite tough time for Russia and Ukraine and like all post-Soviet countries. A lot of crime, a lot of gang violence, a lot of like just people taking each other's businesses and stuff like that. But my father was actually pretty successful in building his business. He was installing ventilation systems in different like schools and like buildings and factories, stuff like that. And so 90s was quite entrepreneurship type in Russia. Many people tried to build their small businesses. It was finally allowed after the Soviet Union collapsed, and we were quite actually lucky because like our town had money because of the oil reserves. It wasn't the case for most parts of Russia. So my father was quite outgoing, trying to like build different variations of his business, find like new places to build, and just earn more with his resources, trying different endeavors. He eventually like bought what is like a mill, or where they do lumber wood for outside buildings. That factory was eventually expropriated by like criminals without like compensation. So stuff like that like kept happening, and he was, by 2004 he was completely exhausted, like trying to sort of survive in this like a mad world where the rules kept changing all the time. It's like very hard to describe to people who never lived there what it was like for people, because basically throughout his life so many rules and even countries changed. It was one country in the 1980s, it was completely different country in the beginning of the 90s, completely different country in the middle of the 90s, completely different country in the late 90s, and then of course 2000s came, and that was literally like criminals taking control over the country and building their rules of that kind of nature. And so he, as sort of any man, he kind of enjoyed his beer at evenings to release the stress, but he was like managing it, and didn't drink every day for the most part of his life. But towards the end, like towards these like 2003 2004, he started drinking almost every day, and it was not only beer but vodka as well. And it was basically the only way to like again process his emotions, to deal with the stress that he was enduring. We were also, like me and my sister, putting more stress because we were both in St. Petersburg, which was quite expensive to sustain. We both like sort of were in universities, and just tried to also navigate this world. And so by that time his legs got like swollen. He had troubles walking, and he was like only 48 years old in 2004. So when he died in 2005, he was 49, and he would, like, I can tell for sure that he would have died eventually, like year, maybe couple years after that, if it didn't happen the way that it did, from like all these complications, health complications, basically, right? Like he was looking for the way out. If I would sort of read him right now from sort of this place of knowledge, understanding. Of course, I didn't have that awareness. I was 23 at that time, even 22. And so I was staying with my friends on that day, sleeping over, and around 6 a.m. my mom called on my cell, and she basically told me that my best friend, whose name is Alexey, died that night, and she received a call from Alexey's mother, and basically he was in the same car with my father. So she's kind of like, be prepared that like they're gonna soon call us and tell us that my father Sergey also died. And so around an hour later, she did receive the call from the hospital saying that they got the body. And so basically what happened is that like he had his own car, but at the time it was broken, and so he had a project in another city, like a small town next to Nizhnevartovsk, and they needed to go there on a car, and he was like very excited that like this new project happened and this new opportunity emerged. And Alexey at that time, he like stayed in Nizhnevartovsk, like we went to the same high school, we stayed friends after the school. He wasn't like really my best friend during the high school, but then he became my best friend after, and we started to make movies together. And he was very passionate about it. He really wanted to sort of contribute, and he always gave like good notes, and he was curious about like filming that. Like, so we basically made like this like experimental, small, low budget movie together about crime, about the criminals in Nizhnevartovsk. And so Alexey was always like, at that period of time, he sort of like was hired by my father, and he, like, I would say, treated as sort of the son that he never had, because like my father always wanted me to like sort of inherit this business, but it wasn't my thing. Like, it wasn't my thing at all. Like, I couldn't sort of do it in any shape or form, even if I was trained. I was passionate about the movies. I was passionate about like spirituality and stuff like that, shamanism. So that's why like I really didn't have like that connection with my father. Nothing that he enjoyed that I liked. Then interestingly enough, he really liked movies as well. He was never actually a fan of the movies. He was a fan of filmmaking, if it makes sense. He had like a camera, like 8mm video camera during the Soviet Union. So like he made some sort of like a small shorts with his friends, and then he like during the 90s he bought like high-8 Sony camera, and he kind of like encouraged me to continue, and he bought me my first camera when I was in university, and he bought me a laptop to be able to edit the movies. So like he was actually always supportive of that. He just never understood me. Right, like it was that kind of, and I never understood him, like the struggles that he endured. Like I can only see it now with my knowledge and with the understanding of history and understanding of like what the government of Russia is and how it basically treated people. But at that time, I never sort of could really relate to him in any other way than through that sort of filmmaking, through like camera, right? Like that was sort of our bonding element. And he actually participated in some of the scenes that we shot with Alexey in that movie. So he sort of like played like a crime boss sort of thing. And so Alexey started to work with him probably like around 2003, 2004. I never seen them before that, like sort of engaging. I actually was the one through that film that introduced them. But yeah, he was hired by him, and they kind of like actually had a great team. And I couldn't understand why at that time. Of course, right now I have the soul awareness, and they kind of like, they basically the soulmates of one soul family, and they have deep connection as well together. And they have very distinct specific archetypes, which I will tell later why this car crash happened, exactly how it did. And so the thing was that like that car was not even Alexey's or my father's. It was this other friend of Alexey, who was also like a young guy in his early 20s, who just like happened to lend them the car, and he was also in that car, and he was also like working for my father, right? So my father was really excited about this journey, about this trip, like going there. Like it was kind of after the long period of different like hurdles and struggles, he finally found a good project that he was passionate about. And so the three of them went on that drive to that other city. And probably it happened in the evening. I'm not even really sure. I don't think it was the night, but basically the car, Alexey was driving the car, and it was like this all like a Russian car, of course, which like barely has any like safety things in it. And he was starting to speed out on the opposite lane to pass the car, and the truck came in front of them, and they basically had a full front collision with that truck, with all three of them dying in the instant, of course, and with like basically bodies torn apart, which again, very important element to the story if we're talking about the design of my father's soul. So that event happened, and not only that I sort of lost my best friend and my father in the same car crash, my best friend actually killed my father, sort of thing, right? So it was, and for me it was never sort of like a thing that somebody did something wrong. Like I never perceived it as that. But the interesting detail that like the thing that crushed me after I received the call from my mother telling me that my father has died in this way was that a day before, basically before he, like literally before he went on this drive, he called me. And I was like in my work, I was working at that time as a waiter in the 5-star hotel. And I was like literally incredibly devastated and lost, because I just graduated from the university, and the only job that I could get was of the waiter, even though like I had a degree in public relationships in film. Film was literally dead at that time in Russia. There was like basically like 2-3 movies maybe shot a year or something like that. The entire system was devastated. So at that time I was like never happy about like my state and everything that was happening around me in St. Petersburg, how everything was structured. But basically, in order to get in order to get the job, you had to have like special documents. It was sort of fine for the residents of the city who was born there, but for the outsiders, like we were treated basically like immigrants. It was sort of, to find the apartment, you had to like had a registration in the city, but for that you had to own your apartment or place, and which I never did. I was just renting. And so I was looking around, and like I felt literally like lost. But the thing is that I was also feeling like abandoned and betrayed by my parents, because they sort of sent me there, but they never sort of explained me the rules or helped me navigate this reality, and I never understood that country, right? Like, and especially those kinds of rules of engagement, or what I need to do to like sort of overcome my obstacles. And so so I was working in that place, and he called me literally like when I was like on a working shift, and I was like not in the best mood, very upset and very like hopeless, I would say. And he started to talk to me, and the first words that he said on that call, I felt cold calling you today. So basically his soul already knew that he would gonna die. Like his soul already chose the moment of death. This is something that we would also talk throughout this podcast, is that like the souls map many different exit points throughout their lives, throughout the life of a human being, and then they chose the most appropriate one based on the circumstances around them, right? So his soul already chose the death, and knowing my archetype of the spiritual guide of death, he was basically calling to ask for a confirmation. To kind of like, my soul was supposed to tell him whether he should leave or not. At that time, I had no awareness of that. Of course, I was just like his son, like just receiving the call from my father, and I was actually glad that he called. Like it was a nice call, but it like, and he rarely did. That was the other thing, is that like he was just, but it was that call. He kind of like to tell me that he loves me, like that kind of thing. I think that call became like sort of one of the main things of my spiritual awakening, like in the process of processing the grief that followed, right? Like, because it was such a charged moment, it was such you can't make this up, right? Like these things sort of impossible, that like he would call when he doesn't, and like just tell me that he loves me, and that he tries to sort of almost make amends of some sorts, but then it like spiraled into this conversation where he was kind of telling me to like go to different companies in St. Petersburg and offer his services, like of installing ventilation systems, and then he kind of like started to insist that I should do that, and like I was basically completely dismissal of that, because again, I was not that person who would ever be able to do that. It was not my path. I would never sort of continue doing that. And it was, in my perception, it was so unrealistic that I was kind of like dismissive energetically and in my words, because I'm kind of like, it felt as almost I'm being the father here, like kind of like telling him that this is just not the dream that you can actually follow, because I already knew what St. Petersburg were and how the like say outsiders were treated there, and like that the market was already like divided and all of that kind of things, so for me it was sort of like this kind of like a very, very naive idea to expand this business in this way. And if he ever wanted to, he should have do it himself, like not me, because again, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the language of the ventilation systems, I don't know how to sell things, it's not my nature at all. But of course, after the death, I was like, I was cursing myself for like many months, because I was convinced that I was partially responsible for his death. Because if I was at least in some form supportive, that would kind of changed his sort of mood, like, or his sort of desire to continue living, let's say it like that. And evidently then my mother shared like a few years later that around a week before the death, she was like sort of tending to his wounds on the legs, and she was like, I know that she like never, by that time she didn't love him, and she was frustrated with him for the most parts. She picked the fights for no reason. She constantly complained about the money. She constantly was bitching about like just basically everything, so then she was like dismissive of him. And so she was tending to his wounds on the legs, and he kind of like asked her, I'm going through this like tough period of time, would you be there for me? And she's, of course, as like knowing my mother, she just lied and said that she, of course, would be there for him. But I know that inside she kind of like, oh no, like I want you to, like, be gone. So basically my mom first told him that, yeah, it's time for you to leave. And then it was sort of my final decision as a spiritual guide of death to actually tell him that it's time for you to leave. And the souls chose the moment of death for many different reasons, but one of the primary reasons is that they know that they finished most of their missions that they supposed to finish in their lives, but also they know that they can help their beloved ones or their soulmates from their soul family from the other side more than they can help them in the physical body. And that literally exactly what happened with my father. So he was so caring and so loving of me and my sister that he wanted to help us, but he literally exhausted all of the resources on the physical plane to help us, and we're all constantly struggling for money and like couldn't like make a living because our mother was never good with resources. She drained the resources, she explored our resources, she never supported our endeavors with my sister. She was like very sort of oppressive, let's say it like that. She was kind of like a narcissistic abuser, if you would sort of use the modern terminology, but I would talk about that more later. But basically, she had a lost soul. It's a very interesting shamanic and important concept that I also going to be sharing more details, but it's like very important to acknowledge that fact that she was not communicating with either of us in a proper way, or seeing us as a unit that can build something together, and she only thought about herself, exactly for that reason, because she lost her soul. And so when my father died, that was like a man's period of mourning and grief, but I was actually quite fine with that, surprisingly. The way that I took it, it was sort of like, I think it's because at that time I didn't know of my essence, but it was clear for me that like death comes to me natural, like just I take it as a sort of natural order of things. My friends were like surprised how calm I was in that period. Like, of course, I did cry for like a couple of days right after that, but since then it kind of like became this sort of just this process of integrating. I just knew how to integrate grief, if it makes sense. That's like one of the important things when we're talking about the grief, because the grief comes from the same point of love. It's the love that was never fulfilled. It was love that never was explored or shared, right? So we grieve, and our heart walls break exactly as they break when we fall in love. Because we basically fall in love with the divinity, with ourselves, with our story, with our close people, through this death, right? Like, and through then, if you sort of process grief properly, which means sort of crying your tears, if you want to feel sorry for yourself, like that's completely fine. I was in that state after each period of mourning that I experienced in my life. But then sort of also digest to see the entire story, to see the entire arc. And for me, like knowing my father's story, it was not hard to integrate grief, because I knew that he was suffering, and so I knew that he would like die quite soon enough anyway. And to have that instant death, which, even though it was traumatic, was kind of like partially a relief. So I felt good for him, like that he doesn't need to endure this shit anymore, that he doesn't need to like deal with like governments and policies and Russia, and he doesn't need to deal with my mother. So that was the process of like grief for me, is that like I was able to integrate it properly because of that, because I was seeing his story and I was like, okay, he actually wanted to leave. I know that he wanted to leave, and even though I felt sorry for that entire story and for the tragedy, and I felt sort of ashamed for the way that I talked to him on the phone on that day, slowly, day by day, I kind of like, yeah, this is his story and this is how it should have ended. For some reason, I just had that knowing inside of me. So once I processed that grief, a very interesting and unusual thing started to happen, is that I started to see his soul in my dreams communicating with me, and then eventually he started to show up in the real life. And that from that moment, I kind of like started to understand my design, is that I could see souls, right? Like, so any trauma, like, or as I mentioned, the grief is the same as love. Love is actually the same level of trauma. But through love or grief, we are elevating our abilities, our talents, our naturally given talents. And before that time, like, I never sort of seen souls as separate beings from the human. Um, but I did like sort of have my own intuitive communication with the divinity. If it makes sense, it was sort of more intuition and kind of like more knowing things. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything. I was sort of like just knew certain things. And I could also like sort of read people's energies. And yeah, I was quite young and I wasn't like developing them. And it wasn't the thing that, in my circle that anybody sort of, I never had anybody like a grandma or like a teacher who would sort of confirm my talents, right? Like, so for me, it was just my perception of life, and I never knew that other people don't see the life like that. But from the moment of my father's death, his soul started to come to me more and more frequently, and then I kind of understood, oh, okay, this is my father's soul actually trying to reach me and try to talk to me. What started to happen is that like we were starting to build a completely new relationship, and that relationship thrives to this day. So I continue to communicate with his soul, and he is one of my spiritual guides. So we kind of like share a little bit of the same soul's essence. He just a younger soul, but because he's transitioned to the other side, he can sort of help me more. And from that moment, he started to provide me direct guidance of what to do in my life. And that guidance led me to this point, basically, right? Like to unravel in my shamanic talents, to understand my design, to like share this knowledge, to become a writer. It was sort of everything that he started to tell me from that moment was for that purpose. And of course, at that time, like I couldn't share that knowledge with anybody. I didn't know like how people would take it. I never talked about it. I was just like communicating with him, and I was just like trying to hear his guidance as best as possible. And with any guidance, it doesn't really matter if it's like the soul of your ancestors or like a higher beings, like ascended masters or angels or other spiritual beings. You always receive the guidance, but then you kind of like process it through your intuition and through your heart, and of course through your reason and logic. That's all the tools that you have in possession for this specific reason, that you would be able to discern and digest and understand. And so everything that he would say that resonated with inside of me, I would sort of accept that knowledge, let's say it like that. I would take some time to like hear it, because again, I was like just exploring the world of shamanism. I was just like curious about it. I read like a few books, but I never really was into that, and I really didn't have the words for it. But he's sort of the way that I perceive souls, I see them as sort of this in the form of a human being, but just being translucent, just being sort of like this energy, ethereal or astral being, right? Like sort of shaped in the form of a human, and having the same features, stuff like that for us. But the most importantly, the way for me to sort of like to see the soul is like through the eyes, right? Like so they can actually change their appearance. Sometimes just because they sort of have the previous incarnation where they have the most empowering body, and they would come to me in that form, or they would like can even change their shape based on their sort of like mood, or like goals that they assign. But usually they do come to me in the form of the present, like the last incarnation or the present incarnation. So that started to slowly unravel, and I started to understand that this is apparently my design, and this is how I sort of do things, or how I would sort of engage in the world. And he sort of like his first guidance was the next year I went to do a work and travel program in the United States of America. He kind of like encouraged that. He helped my mother to pay for it, and sort of like helped me during that time where I was there. to gather my knowledge, to understand this land, to understand that I probably would like to move from Russia, because I never felt there as myself, and my friends always referred to me as like, you're like, they always said like, you're not Russian, you may be American, we don't know, we never like experienced Americans, but that's how we sort of see you, that's how we perceive you. Even though I was like always passionate about politics, and I was always passionate about how things are sort of turning bad in Russia, and I was always vocal about it. I saw where this country was heading, and I kind of like never liked it, and never sort of could accept it. That was like sort of on a physical level, but the spiritual, I kind of like could understand that there was something in me that was not of that world. It just wasn't my story. It's not really that like it's a bad or good country. There are like many countries that are far worse than Russia, and it's actually there's so many things, like looking back, like looking from the perspective of living outside of it, there are actually many things that you just take for granted, and you don't really understand that they are like actually blessings, maybe blessings in disguise, but still blessings. And so I have kind of like since the moment I moved, I kind of completely shift my understanding. But at that time, yeah, it was that sort of kind of perception that it's not my place to be. And accidentally, during my last couple of weeks in New York, I met this like a producer who like made few independent movies that I really enjoyed. He got like Sundance Awards and stuff like that, and he was actually in the theater as well. And he kind of like, oh, you can come here for the internship. Maybe one day, maybe you'll be able to apply. So I returned to Russia with that kind of understanding, is that I would apply for that internship in film. And then it's just like one thing after another. It never materialized, mainly because I didn't understand it was free internship. And of course, I just didn't have money to be able to pay to stay in New York and to be able to sustain myself. And like basically my visa was denied on that foundation. And then all of a sudden, my father's soul appeared in that space while I was on the train, and he basically started to directly channel the guidance to me. And that emotional shock of like the rejection, and changing of my plans, and just not understanding what to do next in life, kind of opened up another level of my abilities. But it was very, very not only intuitive change of perception, but like again, very clear appearance of him in my space, and also very clear guidance that he shared with me. And so he basically told me that I will be providing you the steps for your empowerment that would eventually lead you to move from Russia. But it wasn't the main point of it. It was also the main point of like just becoming myself, knowing myself, understanding myself, and all of that kind of thing. And so what he said is that he told me to sell the piece of land that he had in the Western Ukraine and use that money to make a movie. That piece of land was like his sort of ancestral grounds, like his father, his grandfather, they all came from that place. The village was called Sloboda. It's like 25 kilometers from Chernovtsi, which is like a Western Ukraine, not literally like half an hour from Romanian border. And there are few families with the same last name as we are in that village. So there was like a piece of land, not really big, but sort of enough to like raise the produce and sort of even sustain yourself. And so he started to build like a house there. It only had like this wooden old like 100 years old, like a small house there, and he decided to build like proper one to sort of for his retirement, let's say it like that. He like dreamed about it. He invested most of his free like any resources that he had to build that place. And by the time of his death, it was just the foundation was there, all the walls were there, the roof was there, but nothing inside of it was like sort of done. So it was like a just carcass of the building, almost like a skeleton. And he was, my mother buried him not far from that piece of land, sort of on the cemetery of that village. And so he was like, okay, sell this place, get the money, and use that money to make a movie. And yeah, when I presented that sort of idea to my mother that this is what I'm going to be doing, of course, I didn't tell her that our father told me to do that, because she, like, to this day, she doesn't believe that I communicate with him. So it was no point of like telling all of that. When I shared that, she of course sort of like said no, or said yes, as like she would always do, as like trying to pretend and sort of like be nice. But at the same time, she's like, from that moment on, she's like started to develop like deep despite of my essence and deep despite of everything that I was doing. She like literally told me like this movie would never go anywhere, like you're just wasting your time, like nobody's gonna like do it. And she was like so obsessed with money that even though she had a place to live, and both my sister and I had place to live, and there was like a plenty of money that she received after his death. So she met a man by that time, so like he was also sort of like, she started to live with him. So she was covered. It wasn't like that she was like sort of desperate for that money, but just that sort of the idea that I would like sort of do something like that was so outrageous for her that like I wouldn't like get just a normal job and like just do thing and just like waste money on something like that was completely sort of out of her reach. But the thing is that like she wasn't able to sell that place herself because she despised Western Ukraine. She believed that all Western Ukrainians are like sort of bad people, that they are like sort of envious and malicious, and that they are like basically like frauds. I would say it like that. And so she didn't want to engage with them whatsoever. So it was only me who could actually sell that place. And that's why she kind of like agreed to that, because like she hoped that I would like sell it and like change my plans, right? So I went there myself to sell this place, and it eventually took me like 3 months to sell it, because it was like not a finished building, and there was a sort of like a paperwork of the zoning or stuff like that. I don't even remember what was the issue, but it had to be changed on the paperwork before it could be signed away to another owner. So my realtor like spent, I don't know, like many days going back and forth from the city to this like a village to figure out that paperwork and then actually find somebody to purchase that place. And it was sold for $15,000 US, and 3 of them went to sort of for the expenses, to cover all these expenses that I incurred to selling this place. So eventually, like with $12,000, I was able to buy like a medium professional camera, like a sort of TV. On like a mini DV cassettes, Sony HDR, I think it was called, something like that, and basically like the boom pole and the mic and some other like lighting, and then I started to get the guidance that from my father but also from the land, and by that time I started to like communicate with the land that this movie has to be shot at the Baikal Lake in Russia. And the Baikal Lake in Russia, like I never visited it, I never been to that area of Russia, and it's basically like 6-hour flight from St. Petersburg. So logistically, it didn't really make a good, like a solid investment. Like it was sort of a very, very crazy idea, if I can sort of explain it in the best words to understand how it was taken by my friends and by my mother, of course, that like not only that he's making a movie, he's for some reason making this movie, like 5,000 kilometers away from the place that he lives. And so, and not only that you have to fly to Irkutsk, the closest town to Baikal Lake, the drive to the lake also like a few hours, so you had to rent a car and like basically do all of that, right? Like, so, but since I received that guidance in the August of 2007 that I need to make a movie, I started to write a script for that movie. And it basically was just coming of age movie, like a Sundance type of like American independent movie. I was very inspired by that, like by the movies that came from America, like independent productions, avant-garde productions that came out in the 90s. And I was very excited how they treated the language and how they perceived the stories and how it was different from most of the movies that were created at that time, both in Europe or in Hollywood. The idea was like this, basic idea of like four friends from college having this road trip through which they sort of understand themselves, and we kind of like decided that like my friends who were at the time I was interacting, they were not a film people, but they were kind of supportive of this endeavor. They were curious how it would turn out and they wanted to participate. And basically it was 7 of us who went on that trip. We rented 2 cars. There was like 2 actresses that we hired, and one of my friends, he was main lead. I was also playing one of the roles in the movie, just like to sort of save the expenses. That was the idea behind it. And one of my friends, like my ex-girlfriend, was our DP, so she was like in charge of camera. And so we went to that trip. Like I barely convinced all of them to go, but because I was paying for that, they kind of like saw that as a sort of a gesture of goodwill and kind of like a thank you for the time that like they helped me, because like since my father's death, I was like constantly sometimes living with them. And it just like I felt sort of obliged to sort of share with them or sort of thank them in some way. And for me, that trip was sort of the spirit. Like I understood that this trip would be spiritual journey, and I needed the support. Like they were my closest people at that time, so it was important for me like to gather them for that journey. And sort of we had this 12-day trip, and like on the first day we spent a couple of days shooting in Irkutsk, and once we got to the Baikal Lake, I spent the first night basically outside of our like a place where we stayed. I just stayed on the shore of the Baikal Lake, and it was this kind of a very profound spiritual experience, I would say. It was sort of like the download started to happen, I was sort of feeling the empowerment of my essence. I just knew that the lake was talking to me. I was just like convinced of that on that day, on that night, and I was invigorated, excited. I was looking forward. I was like renewed with hope, with everything. And I was very naive at that time. I was very young. I didn't use our resources properly. We wasted a lot of days just trying to figure this out. Most of my friends didn't actively participated in trying to help me with that. They just like relied everything on me, and I felt sort of overpowered because I had to sort of perform, and at the same time sometimes perform in some scenes, but at the same time just like be in charge of like everything basically, right? Like from producing to directing. And that was just the resources kind of like the days just flew by, and we didn't shot like enough of the coverage that I would like hoped, and many dialogues were like just flat out like didn't work, and we with some scenes, we sort of the idea of my filmmaking was it's close to what Terrence Malick does in his like latest movies. Is that basically you just have a point A and point B in the story, but then you allow the actors to get there themselves without like specific directions or without the specific sort of like even the dialogue. So there were some dialogues that were written, and we tried to get that, but it never actually worked, and we wasted a lot of time of that. Even though like I clearly understood at that time, like right there, that this was not a journey about the filmmaking. That's why my father told me to do this, and that's why it has to happen in Baikal Lake, because it was actually an initiation, and the specific that part of the land or that part of the planet is coincides with my Tolkien archetype and with some of my energies. So like it's evident for me why it had to happen on that territory. And it's just a profound place to be, actually. Like the energies of that place, it's like it's very hard to describe. Like I've been there only that on that trip, but that's just like such a unique piece of land and such a unique nature and such a unique everything. And you can clearly hear the land speaking. You can clearly hear how sort of the divinity is there, you know, the nature is there, and like also how like it was very clear to see how people were directed, or like how people were even, I don't know, like punished or rewarded for their choices or for their words or for their actions. It like just happened in an instant. It was just like this kind of like the land was in charge of everything there, you know. The places that we shot, the moments that we shot that actually worked, that it was all directed by the land. It was never sort of everything sort of where I tried to ingest my ego and tried to follow the script and try to sort of like be this filmmaker. Those scenes fell short of like everything, and they never like were good enough. But everything that was directed by the land herself on the moment, either through like just elements that we shot or like just interpretation, when it was like not a strict dialogue but just a free flow of ideas, that always worked. And so I came back from that trip kind of like both, like having both disappointment and excitement. And I brought iMac from my trip to States. Just got a cheapest iMac that I could buy. That basically whatever I earned during that trip was invested in that iMac, and so I started to slowly make my movie. And the editing, of course, I was not experienced in editing. I didn't know anybody in editing, so I started to basically invent that myself, or try to figure it out myself. Let's say it like that. And it was not an easy process, like just entire thing of like ingesting in the computer and like just dealing with dailies and trying to sort it out and trying to understand this flow. It took so much of my time, and like it didn't work. And most dialogues like I hated, and I just didn't like the some scenes. I didn't like how we wasted time. Like it was a lot of like this sort of, again, disappointment and misunderstanding. And I was like kind of like, why I was receiving this guidance if it this challenging, right? Like so, but again, I was gaining the profession that would have eventually sustained me for years to come, and which continues to sustain me, which is like a film editor. So mostly I work as assistant film editor right now, but at the same time, like I did edit a few movies, all experimental, all avant-garde, all independent, just like basically artistic expressions through the editing. And I was really inspired by the craft of editing, because I believe that this is the main primary form that distincts cinema from any other forms of art. I think that the movie editing makes the movie. This is my belief, and I don't consider movies that are shot in one single take as movies, because they are not. And so this is kind of like I really enjoyed actually being engaged in that craft. That part started to excite me more and more, the part of discovering the art of editing. the part of like understanding what filmmaking is and just understanding how the movie can be intuitive if it's engaged differently. So I started to see that the filmmaking that I was trying to achieve was completely different from anything that I actually saw at that time. And the idea behind was sort of like the spiritual, trying to understand the essence of the world. For me, that was the philosophy of my filmmaking, is that I clearly could see where I would, if I was engaging with the life and the scene from the ego, from like sort of, oh, this is what we're gonna do and this is how we're gonna do it, it would fall apart. But if I would allow sort of nature to support it in some way or the other, the scene would work. Or I would shoot something we would shoot something very unique or interesting that would actually elevate the movie. So I started to like see that perception because the filmmaking is like a very rigid and kind of like structured and totalitarian thing, actually, where everything is supposed to be the way that it is, and we're gonna shoot it the way that it does. But then once I started to engage in this movie this way, I kind of like, okay, this is actually why I was guided to start making movies, not only because it was sort of my passion and that I would develop a profession that would be able to sustain my life and the skills that like would actually help me make a living, but also kind of understand the philosophy of life, if it makes sense, like that you see through that engagement, you could see the like hidden forces of the world playing out their role, like the basically nature directing something, like creating the obstacles or creating the events or creating the situations where certain scenes could be shot or certain scenes not. And so when I dealt with all this like a technical part of it, like it took me a few months. It was like sort of I think it was the late 2008, where I kind of understood that in order for me to edit the movie, I had to allow a movie to tell its story rather than me trying to construct it in the way that I was seeing it. And I just only started to get an understanding. And of course, like all my friends, like they never actually were that engaged in that movie. Like they kind of like just did it because they wanted a trip, they wanted to support me, they liked the idea, but they didn't like the process, and they didn't actually help me in any other way moving forward. I was like really missing the way that, for example, Alexey was helping me, like when I was like doing the smaller movies, he was constantly providing good feedback. He was constantly like sort of criticized me constructively. He was kind of like engaged in it. He wanted to get a better product, even though what we shot was like just like the teenagers like having fun, there was nothing serious in that. But all my friends were completely detached, and so like I sort of made the assembly based on the script and everything that we did at the end of the 2008, and sort of presented to all of my friends. And I kind of never liked the reaction. And it's very interesting that how, again, it's very sort of intuitive and spiritual, is that you're watching a movie, and even if the people don't say anything, you kind of like pick up where it sucks, like where it doesn't work. And of course, like nobody sort of had any big dreams for that movie, right? Like it wasn't sort of something that, well, we're just gonna have a breakthrough or something like that. I was sort of like believed that it would be my sort of a foundation that I can present, that this is how I engage in the movies, and then from then on I would be able to get something, like some work, or maybe some projects, or maybe some producer would sort of see my vision and kind of like would help me to advance it. But because I was on my own and kind of like trying to figure it out all by myself, I was kind of like felt quite lost, because the result was like incredibly disappointing. And so I continued to engage with it. I continued to edit it and trim it down to sort of like to 75 minutes, which was way too long for that movie. Then what I did is that I went to a film studio, and was because it was so cheap. No, there was no movies being made at that time. I was able to sort of like for I think it cost me overall $2,000 to make the entire sound re-recorded in the big like sort of studio space, like where the actual movies are being made. Like every single sound was designed on the on that space in that studio, and it was mixed properly, and it was sort of elevated that to a different extent. And then my sound designer and sound editor on that movie, who was working in that film studio, he offered to invite his musician friend who like played in one of the famous Russian bands, and he would record like a soundtrack, like basically the score for that movie. We wrote a couple of songs with my friends, because my best friend at that time, he was into music making. I wrote the lyrics for that song, and he wrote the music, and we kind of like recorded that in the studio. But then this other guy, the musician, he actually me and my sound designer, we came with this idea is that we're gonna just screen the movie for him, and he would just record the soundtrack, improvising to the visions of the movie, right? Like to the images of the movie. And then we would like sort of cut it and trim it and like do it like that. And so by that time we were actually shooting kind of like a sequel to that movie. Because like the story was not clear, it was not understandable, it was very strange. And my friend who was playing the lead role in that first movie, he was again playing the lead role in the second movie, which was basically the same kind of storyline, right? Like, and so by the beginning of 2009 we were sort of engaged with these two movies, and we kind of like finished them editing, doing the sound work, and doing this music work with them. And they were basically like two 70-minute movies. But again, it was very clear that these movies were not like get me anywhere. I was very upset while I was doing that. I was very upset about that, because I was kind of like, if my father is giving me this guidance, it's supposed to be for a higher reason. It's supposed to get me somewhere, like it kind of like should show me my path and stuff like that. And it never did. And I kind of like just had closed doors here and there. And I just continued having this like odd jobs to sustain myself. I still had some money left from like my father's inheritance. And by that time, my mother like sold one of the apartments in Nizhny and bought us, me and my sister, the apartment in St. Petersburg. So at least I had like didn't need to pay the rent. But still, I didn't have like any good job that like would pay my bills, and so it was sort of this like a continuous prospect of like why am I being engaged in this like stupid things with these movies. I continued to shoot more movies at that time. I was trying to like play around. I was also doing like music videos. I started to do like videography just here and there, like weddings and stuff. Like, but again, it didn't like, it was just like few random gigs that nothing of good came of it. And then I was continued to be disengaged with life. I was also convinced that I would never find a woman, and I was not even interested in like engaging with them. I kind of like I'm just like an outsider talking to the spirits, talking to the souls. Like I'm just like doing this filmmaking. Nobody's interested in me. I don't have anything solid, even though like I had my place to live on my own, which was something, at least something. I didn't have a good job, and I kind of like, what's the point? Like nobody's gonna waste her time. Like not a single woman would waste her time on me because of who I am, and because I just don't have anything solid going for me. And we had the premiere of the first movie around the spring of 2008, and I sort of like gathered whoever I knew from university and like from the guests, and at least that place gave me some feedback. There was a lot of like a solid critique, and I was clearly seeing that the movie was too long for what it was. It was like, again, 75 minutes, but it should have been like half of that time probably. I was so determined that this is like a future that I should like sort of do it. Anyway, it was a very interesting experience, and I was like sort of having this. I had a costume on the premiere, like a jacket, and the pants like a very sort of presentable and person, which I never wore that kind of like a garments. Really, not my thing. And so I just put my picture from the premiere as my avatar picture on the Russian social media called vk.com, which was a ripoff of Facebook. It had the same sort of things. It has everything. The layout was the same, the structure was the same, the purpose was the same, but it was not a Facebook. It was just a Russian version of it. So after that premiere, again, I was just continuing with my life, trying to edit other projects. And then in late August of 2009, I'm receiving this friend request on this vk.com from this woman that I never knew, never saw, and who had like these beautiful pictures. She was like sort of professionally shot, and she was like just gorgeous looking, like very attractive. And I'm kind of like, oh, this is kind of like a scam or something like that, and just didn't know what to make of it. But I accepted her request, and I replied with a message, "Do we know each other?" Funny enough, kind of like my soul already knew the answer, right? Because basically this woman became my wife, and then I discovered that we had 7 past lives together. So of course, like, we knew each other. Our souls knew each other. And so I replied to her, "Do we know each other?" And she replied, "You know the answer," like, which it wasn't, right? Like, we didn't know each other in this physical life. We never met. And then from that on, I just like engaged in a conversation with her, and like, we started to talk for 2 weeks. And it was incredibly free-flowing, engaging, and very kind of like a dense, in terms of like the spirituality and the topics that we would engage. I never had the conversations with anybody in my life of that nature, of the kind of the complexity and density of it. And sort of 2 weeks later, after these exchanges, I kind of invited her for a physical date, and she agreed. And sort of on that date, we just went for a walk in the downtown St. Petersburg. I brought my chocolate chip cookies that I did at that time, and she brought mulled wine. It was not really a cold night, but it was like very, very, very romantic, actually. Just like standing on the shore and going through the bridges and just walking around with that mulled wine and like cookies, and not like really going for like dinner or anything like that. And especially I couldn't afford any of that anyway. And like I salute her that she kind of understood that, and she never sort of insisted on it, and she created this idea for this date. That's how she proposed it. So, and around 2 hours after we started our walk, we ended up on this like a Mars field, which is sort of a place of gathering. It's like a downtown St. Petersburg, right around like historical buildings, and it has this eternal flame which honors like fallen on the Second World War. And it's usually a place where a lot of like musicians gather to just sort of jam and like play around. And we stopped there, and there was like a guy playing on a guitar, a famous Russian song by Viktor Tsoi. His band called Cinema, and we kind of like stand there, and she turns to me, and this fire just illuminates her eyes, and she's kind of like looks at me, and I'm seeing that like we're in love with each other, right? Like, it's just like so clear that we see something in each other beyond our physical costumes, that like we just not here as this man and woman, but there's something eternal between us, this like a connection, something that I never experienced before. And at that moment I was like looking at her eyes, seeing that she actually fell in love with me and I'm falling in love with her. And I had this thought, I know this woman. And I kept like, from that moment on until our date ended like a few hours ago, I was like, how do I know her? It's just impossible to know her. Because like I'm seeing this person for the first time, but I just know these eyes, and I never experienced anything like that to that extent, to this like a very intense and kind of just not only knowing but just like seeing her for not only, again, as she's a person, beautiful woman, you know, like everything's appealing about her, but yeah, there was something like much deeper, and this was this feeling that I know the soul of Veronica. I know how we somehow like met, you know. And so from that moment on until the end of the date, I was kept thinking, how is it even possible? So how could I know Veronica if I never met her before? How could I know her eyes? And it was this very intense feeling that you just know this person, you know her soul, you know who she is, but at the same time you kind of like, you know her soul, but you know her as a person as well. You just like didn't need to like know more about her story or what she does, or like her I don't know, things that she does, her insecurities, her small quirks, nothing. You just kind of, I just know this person, I accept her and I love her. And it was just there on the surface, and I like didn't need to like reach for it. But that thought, I never experienced that thought before, is that like I know this person, and I couldn't understand what it is, but it was that kind of like a profound transformation, next sort of step on my shamanic awakening, because that was the like all my hard work to that point, and my dedication to my faith and to my craft was rewarded in the form of unconditional love. So I received this love as a reward for like just committing to myself, committing to the highest truth that I had, committing to hearing the guidance of my father, not knowing where it would lead, but eventually that it would come to this sort of some sort of a physical reward as well. But it was the best reward that you can actually have, because it came from the divinity. I didn't need to question that love. I didn't need to like puzzle through it. I just needed to accept it. And of course, I kind of course had my own sort of insecurities, why this woman would be with me. I'm sort of like this person who like doesn't do anything, can't sustain the living, can't provide for her, you know, all these things. All these reservations came to the surface, of course, in the days after our first date. But that date was just filled with magic. Like after I had that thought in that fireplace that I know this woman, we needed to cross the bridge to the other side where she lived, like sort of to guide her home. But it was already around the time where the bridges are being sort of, how you call it in English, they basically like divide them in half. They just sort of raise the half of the bridges raised to each side, so the bridges can sort of pass at the night. It's like a thing in St. Petersburg because it has so many bridges. Most of the bridges they just have this thing that where they sort of divide them in the night, raise them, and so we were already late for that, and there was like a policeman standing on each shore, of course, not to allow any cars or people to go through, and we just ran for it. Like literally, like policeman was like, stop, you can't go, and we just like ran through that bridge to the other side because like we didn't have other means to get her there, right? Like she needed to get home, and I was also like living on that other side. And it was, again, one of the most romantic things I ever experienced in my life, like just running on the first date through the bridge. So we got her to her place, I got to my place, and yeah, since that we had a second date, we had a first kiss on our second date, and it was just like clear, the connection was clear for both of us, and connection was clear to the extent that was like overpowering and like like, I don't know, I wouldn't say the word exhausting, probably not the right one, but it was just like so overwhelming, right? Like everything felt so vivid and lucid, everything felt so kind of like nothing that I experienced in life, even though I did have romances and girlfriends before that, not too much, but still, but yeah, it was this feeling of kind of not just love, but something much bigger, the soul connection that evidently span through the last 8 centuries, and we were literally in every single life with each other for the last 8 lives, having different engagements, different purposes, different kind of love stories, different connections. Sometimes she was like my mother in one life, then we were like political friends in another life, then we were lovers as well, so different engagements. And around 2 months in, after we decided to sort of date, she saw that I'm like not a sufficient man, and that kind of like scared her, because I was like during that time I was like just sitting in my place in my apartment, editing my movies, surviving on the rest of the monies that I had from the inheritance, not having any kind of a job, and smoking weed a lot. And so she kind of like didn't see any appeal in that lifestyle. She didn't see that I could be sort of like a prospect of a husband, or like even just a boyfriend. Even though I told her that I'm being cautious with my money and I would need to find a job by the March of next year, by the March of 2010. But she kind of like just saw it as sort of just an idea that I would never sort of commit to it. But I just like had this plan that like I need to finish these movies, otherwise it's just never gonna happen. And that I would find a job by then. And so she basically disappeared in November 2009. She kind of like, I can't continue this, we have to break up. She left, and then we didn't see each other until the March of next year. And through that time, I never sort of doubted that we will be together. I was just kind of like, this is the period of life she needs to prove. She needs to receive the proof of my love. She needs to receive the proof that I would actually follow through on my promise to find a job. I need to finish my sort of tasks at hand to be able to actually continue building our relationship, or like actually start to live together, for example, or something like that. But I never doubted it. It was not like all my friends thought I was just obsessed with her and like just being crazy, and like I will find another woman, and it's just like this is like a passing thing. But no, it was sort of, I always relied on that, just knowing that I know her, and just like feeling this unconditional love between us. And at that time when she was sort of separated, it was that, again, the grief, right? Like the grief appeared of that sort of rejection and stuff like that. And I started to have like out of body experiences. So I started to see myself from the perspective of my soul, like from the higher sort of plane, almost like like 10 meters, 15 meters from the ground. Not too high, but still kind of like sort of having a different perception of me. And I started to see that we were actually doing some spiritual work, like our souls were doing the spiritual work while we're not together. And again, I didn't have the awareness of that at that time, but I was like feeling deep connection to her. And I saw her in the dreams. I saw her like sort of had these mental conversations with her, and sort of how I understood that period of time, it was that my soul and her soul were engaged in some sort of like a training or adjustment for us to be able to be physically together. And without that sort of resolution, or without the removal of some kind of a baggage, or that almost like a reset, readjustment of our souls, we couldn't be together. And that was like sort of this realignment happening. And that's why I was very kind of, that was just a knowing thing, is that like we're gonna be together. It's just like, it's not a thing. It's like we're never gonna be apart, and this is just like my future spouse, my future partner. We just like, we're a click. We resonate with film, we resonate with the music, with our spiritual perceptions, the way that we are. Just everything about us felt kind of like in tune, like physically as well. How we matched the alchemy, the sexual alchemy, chemistry that was between us was also palpable, and kind of like a very, very intense. And so yeah, I kind of surrendered my concerns. I trusted my guidance and trusted the faith that it will just realign, and we'll find each other again in the future. It will happen, and nothing will prevent us from being together. But we just need to engage in this, like a sort of this dance of our souls. And I kind of I continued to sort of and at the time I continued to present my gestures of courtship. Like I made her handmade chocolates in like this handmade chocolate box, and like stuff like that, just flowers, like small things of gestures that I could afford, and just trying to communicate with her here and there. We went to movies as a friends, stuff like that, but just like small things. Mostly we didn't physically engage, and I continued to puzzle through this thing. And then we reconnected once I found my job, and we started to live together in April of 2010. And at that time, she shared with me that when she saw my picture, the first time that she saw my picture on the vk.com, and this social media website, before even like talking to me, she said, I had a thought in my mind that this man would be my husband, and I just know this. And yeah, that have actually happened, but it's just like this, we both had an intuitive spiritual perception of our connection that surpasses this life, and just like a big connection through the lifetimes. And so this is my first episode, and we'll continue our story in the following ones.